Although nuclear energy has the best safety record of any energy technology, environmental activists have persuaded much of the public, especially in the developed world, that nuclear is unsafe. Consequently, regulators require multiple excessive layers of safety in nuclear plant design that needlessly boost costs, and lawsuits by opponents to nuclear construction add more costs on top of that. Well, the arrival of safe, inexpensive, small modular reactors, or SMRs, is a game changer for energy production all over the world, perhaps especially for Africa, which has the opportunity to leapfrog over earlier technologies and provide abundant, affordable, reliable, safe electricity for its developing economy. With us to discuss this are Dr. Kelvin Kemm, a nuclear physicist and CEO of Nuclear Africa Limited, a project management company based in Pretoria, South Africa, and Knox Msebenzi, an electrical engineer and managing director of the Nuclear Industry Association of South Africa in Johannesburg. Stay with us, invite your friends to view as well. Welcome to From the Stacks. Welcome. Thanks very much for joining us this evening. We are excited about tonight's program. We're going to be talking about how small nuclear reactors can revolutionize energy generation all around the world. I'm Cal Beisner, the founder and national spokesman of the Cornwall Alliance for the Stewardship of Creation. We are a network of evangelical Christian scientists, economists, theologians, policy wonks, working to educate the public and policymakers about biblical earth stewardship, economic development for the poor, and the gospel of Jesus Christ. This month, in February, we're offering a very special book, a magnificent book called Hot Talk, Cold Science, Global Warming's Unfinished Debate. This is by my dear late friend, Dr. S. Fred Singer, and with the assistance of two other scholars who are friends of mine, in fact, both of them part of the Cornwall Alliance Network, Dr. David Legates and Dr. Anthony Lupo, two climate scientists. This is the third edition of Hot Talk Cold Science. The first one came out in 1997, and we are excited to offer this book. It's a nearly 300-page hardback. It is brilliantly written. It's wonderfully filled with facts and with explanation about climate science and so on. Easy for lay people to understand, and yet it will satisfy every climate scientist that this is done by top experts. So during the month of February, as our way of saying thank you, when you make a gift of literally any size, we will be glad to send you a free copy of Hot Talk Cold Science as our way of saying thank you. All you need to do is go to cornwallalliance.org, click on the donate button, and as you fill out the donation, when you come to the comments field, just enter Hot Talk Cold Science or promo code 21-02 or both, and we'll be glad to send it to you totally free, and your donation will be 100% tax deductible. Well, again, our topic this evening is nuclear energy, particularly small modular reactors that have the capacity to totally revolutionize the production of electricity and its distribution to people around the world. I've been intending to discuss this ever since I first read the article, Economic, Environmental, and Practical Reasons Make Nuclear Power Africa's Best Option, by Dr. Kelvin Kemm and Knox Msebenzi. Dr. Kemm, as I said earlier, is a nuclear physicist and CEO of Nuclear Africa Limited, a project management company based in Pretoria, South Africa. And Knox Msebenzi is an electrical engineer and managing director of the Nuclear Industry Association of South Africa in Johannesburg. So Kelvin and Knox, welcome here. Thank you very much for joining us today. Please tell us a bit about yourselves, beginning with, well, let's begin with Kelvin. Tell us a bit about yourself, what got you into what you do, why it's important to the African people in terms of economic development and environmental stewardship, and other things you think important to say at the start.
Well, thank you very much for having us. It's a pleasure. Knox and I have known each other for many years, and we've worked together on numbers of projects. Now, what's important to bear in mind is that Africa is very big, far bigger than people realize. Africa is bigger than the United States, China, the whole of Europe added together, India too, for that matter, added in. And so it's large, and people don't realize the standard map projection doesn't do it justice. So distances here, for example, I'm in Pretoria, which is the capital of South Africa, high inland. There's a well-known coastal city, Cape Town, which most people I'm sure know of. And the distance from Pretoria to Cape Town is the same distance as Rome to London. And so what we say is that you cannot take first world European solutions that appear to work well in a European country and just transpose them over here and expect that they will just work. The distances are huge. Our geographic conditions are different. We've just had a lot of rain the last week because a cyclone struck Mozambique, a smallish one, but the side effects of the cyclone are swept across Pretoria, Johannesburg, and we've had a lot of rain and so on. That's very useful for the gardens. It makes the plants grow. But here we very often go for long periods of time with no rain. Rain is considered quite a luxury in this part of the world. So when it does come, sometimes it comes very, very strongly and it can wash things away. Other times it's dry. So our geographic conditions, meteorological conditions, and so on are very different. So for a long time now, centuries, it's been the case that many European people, often with the best of hearts and the best of intentions, arrive with solutions and just say, well, it works perfectly in Germany, just you guys do it. And so often African countries adopt these things only to find they don't work here for simple day-to-day reasons. And nuclear is an example. We need nuclear power. And we can discuss that obviously at some length now, but we have to look at it for our own survival and our own benefits.
Yeah. And Knox, how about you? Just give us a bit of your own background and your own perspective on this.
I'm an electrical engineer, as pointed out. I joined the nuclear industry quite a few years ago, coming from electrical engineering to basically saying where does the energy source come from. But I've also worked in a coal power station in my early days, in my early career. So I've had quite a bit of exposure in the electrical as well as in the power industry. Just to respond in a sense, or to add to what Kelvin was talking about, this whole issue about African solutions and that we have got different set of circumstances over here. The sad part about that is money is controlled from the northern hemisphere. Everybody, well, throughout the world now, maybe with the coming of cryptocurrencies, but we're using the US dollars all over the world. So investment of necessity is influenced by northern countries, as it were. So we can want to do certain things for ourselves as Africans, but unfortunately, because we do not have the money, that's a subject that can be discussed at some point as to whether we actually don't have the money or not. But we are constrained. For example, right now, some of our banks are saying they will not fund coal, or it probably is going to be difficult for some of the banks to fund nuclear if they are influenced by sources of funds that are promoting renewable energy. So we've got a bit of a dilemma there, because we We don't have our resources, although we do have all these mineral resources in our countries, but we just don't have the money to do it, or perhaps we don't even believe ourselves that we are capable of solving our own problems. That is problem number one. So coming to this whole thing about nuclear small modular reactors, I remember a few years ago, I was invited to a discussion in Miami. There was a company that was wanting to pioneer this small modular reactor in 2010, I think it was 2010, 2011. One of my points that I raised was that if this technology is not developed and deployed in developed countries, developing countries will necessarily take it with a pinch of salt. I'm glad to see that there has been a lot of development in first world countries in terms of actually pursuing this. Because if we had pursued it on our own, being what we are, like, even ourselves lack confidence in ourselves, is a problem. So I think with these things, we need to work together as the whole world so that there is confidence in the technology. We don't want a situation, for example, there's a lot of talk these days to say the vaccines that are developed in developed countries, a lot of fake news taking it around saying there's a lot of negative things. These things are meant to kill Africans. We cannot do away with some of these things. We need to manage them. So I support the idea that we need to have these solutions for us, but unfortunately, we need to do a lot more than that.
So it sounds like two action items for a lot of people in developed countries would be, one, to encourage elected officials to embrace nuclear energy more than they have done, and particularly SMRs, small modular reactors, in their own countries, so that the technology gets further developed. We get experience with how to put it together, how to put it online, how to deal with problems as they arise, and so on. But partly also, we need to be putting pressure on policymakers to encourage the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and so on, to fund these sorts of programs, not just for nuclear, frankly, but also for coal and natural gas and oil in developing countries, because frankly, those countries desperately need abundant, affordable, reliable, safe energy. And quite frankly, the renewables like wind and solar are not capable of bringing that to them. Just a quick reminder before we go on here to our viewers here. The article, Economic, Environmental, and Practical Reasons Make Nuclear Power Africa's Best Option by Dr. Kemm and Mr. Msebenzi, is on Cornwall Alliance's website. Just go to cornwallalliance.org, click on the blog, and scroll down a bit. By the time you see this, we're pre-recording. It'll be down a little bit after some other articles. But I would really encourage you to read that. It gives you a wonderful way of understanding these things from a South African perspective, a perspective of people in the developing world, but who have a firm grasp on the technological issues that face us as we look to provide that energy that really lifts people out of poverty. Because in fact, abundant, affordable, reliable energy, especially electricity, is essential to lifting and keeping whole societies out of poverty. Over the past century and a half, electricity use has spread around the world, starting in Europe and North America and gaining elsewhere. But today, there are still some parts of the world with very little electricity. Bringing electricity to them is crucial to their leaving poverty behind. As you can see in this satellite composite, there are parts of the world that have lots of light at night. And then there are parts of the world that have very, very little light at night. And much of that is in Africa and parts of Latin America and Asia. And those parts that have so little light are the parts that lack the abundant, affordable electricity that's so important for lifting people out of poverty. Now, up to now, most electricity comes from coal, natural gas, in some places oil, and hydro, followed by large-scale nuclear, and then a comparatively tiny amount, really under 2%, from wind and solar. Today, there's a new option, small-scale nuclear energy. Kelvin, give our viewers a brief introduction to small nuclear reactors, small modular reactors.
Certainly. First of all, I'd like to point out that world electricity consumption has doubled over about the last 25, maybe 30 years. There's absolutely no reason to believe that it's not going to double again over the next 25 to 30 years, probably shorter. If one looks at Africa, Africa's consumption is going to double even quicker because there's a rapid rise. As you indicate in that diagram there, Africa needs electrification. So for South Africa, we have an objective that we need to double our electricity consumption. Many other African countries are as little as 10 to 20% electrified. The only honorable thing they can do is double their electricity consumption, then double it again, then double it again, and then probably double it again. So there's no reason to believe that there's not going to be a major increase in electricity consumption. Now, in South Africa, we have the most southerly nuclear reactor in the world that is a power reactor. That's called Koeberg, and it is down in Cape Town. It's a large reactor of 2,000 megawatts. The big reactors need water cooling, and that is why they typically are found on the coasts where the sea is, or otherwise on the banks of very large rivers or lakes that have got a guaranteed water flow, which we don't have typically in Africa. So for us, what we need to do in South Africa is build big reactors on the coastline, and then because the country is so large, when we go inland, we want to put smaller units of about 100 megawatts. So the small modular reactors are about 100 megawatts. You can make them smaller, 30, 40, 50 if you want to. You can also make them bigger, 200 or so. But I'm going to say 100 just for order of magnitude here, as against 2,000 of Koeberg, and the new big reactors that are coming, or power stations that are coming out now, are coming out at 3,000, 3,500 megawatts for a power station. So the small modular reactors are units of about 100. When South Africa designed what is known as the Pebble bed modular reactor, which we did years ago now, over a decade ago, it was deliberately designed that you could build one reactor, which is 100 megawatts, have a control room, and then you could build another 9 reactors on that same control room, like you add locomotives to a train. So you do not need to build a new entire system to have a second 100 megawatts. And that's very important, that you can upscale like that. So that is what happens with a small modular reactor. Now, the reason why it's called modular is that you can put them together in a factory, essentially. Instead of doing everything on site, you can do mass production in a building with a roof, so that you're not exposed to the rain and the elements of your outside welding or pouring concrete and so on, dependent on the weather. So the cost can be brought down dramatically of building small modular reactors because they're smaller and because of this modular nature. So they're ideally suited for dotting around all over the place. Now, one other very important thing is that in South Africa, we've designed 3 reactors now, small modular reactors, and they are gas-cooled reactors. They use helium cooling. There's numbers of small modular reactors that have been designed that use water cooling, which still means that they have to be near a water source. We deliberately steered away from that and went for gas cooling helium, so that we do not have to have a water source nearby. So they can be put inland near mining areas, or in other African countries, again, which are very large and which do not necessarily have a large volume of water nearby where you want electricity. So that's the fundamental. Gas-cooled reactors for Africa, small so that they're inexpensive to start off with, and that you can add to them, and that you can not necessarily connect to the grid, but we can go into that a little bit later, I think.
Okay. 2 quick follow-ups, excuse me, Kelvin, to what you just said. Pardon me. First, most ordinary folks are just not used to thinking in terms of megawatts. I mean, they may think in terms of, okay, I have a 200-watt light bulb here or something like that. But megawatts, gigawatts, that's not typical conversational topic for people.
Yeah.
So can you give us an idea of like how many homes, how many typical residential homes can be electrified with 100 megawatts versus 1,000 megawatts or 3,000 megawatts? And so if a small modular reactor is providing 100 megawatts, how many homes would that be sufficient for? The other follow-up here is just to ask you, you mentioned that the costs are much lower because of mass production inside, repeating the same thing again and again. That's great. Is that a lower cost per unit produced? Or also, is it a lower cost per megawatt of electricity generated?
Both. Very much a lower cost per unit because it's much smaller, but also much lower per megawatt generated because you can do this mass production.
That's crucial.
And you also don't have such a, yes, and you also don't have such a huge project on your hands that can take a number of years and so on. So you're quicker into sale and so on. So overall, if you look at it, it's a cheaper, more sensible way to go for these smaller reactors. I'm not saying, by the way, that big reactors are out. I think in the case of South Africa, we need the large reactors on the coast where we can put big power into the system, but the small ones are also very valuable. It's not one against the other. It's like having a very big car and a small car. It's very useful to have a small car if you're going shopping and you want to get into parkings easily. A big car is nice if you're going long range cruising. They're not competitors. They have to be parked in a different place in the spectrum. Now, as far as the power is concerned, 100 megawatts will drive a smallish city. I don't like particularly say how many houses because I so often see wind and solar being quoted as they can power so many houses. They leave out only at lunchtime for solar when there are no clouds in the sky. So that type of thing, and depends. They often also take a house which is their so-called average house, which is a tiny little thing. It isn't at all an average house when you look at a real house, so to speak. So I can imagine if you take, I've been to a few towns and cities in the United States. Certainly, all the medium-sized ones, smaller ones, could all be run off a 100 megawatt reactor, for example. So they're not very small. They'll run a town or an entire production plant. You know, the Ford motor car plant or something, I imagine, can quite easily be entirely run on a 100 megawatt reactor with lots to spare, actually. So they are still pretty sizable. Of course, when I said now about the megawatt hours, something that is very important is to distinguish between what's called megawatts, which is the power, and megawatt hours, which is the quantity. If you have a light bulb on for an hour, it has used certain kilowatt hours to run it. With a 100-watt bulb, you can work it out. That's the total amount. Now, electricity is sold both as a commodity and a service, and it's terribly important to remember that it is those two things that count. It is a commodity and a service. When you get up at midnight and you need to go and get a glass of cold water because you're feeling a bit dehydrated, and you flick the light switch on, you want the lights to come on at midnight, which they're not going to do if you connect it to a solar plant, unless it's also connected to some battery system and a more complicated thing. And unfortunately, so many people will quote the total kilowatt hours or megawatt hours that a solar or wind plant has produced in the past year. But they don't tell you, like here in South Africa right now, because we are at the edge of this, the after effects of the cyclone that hit Mozambique. It has rained heavily this past week. It's been cloudy, and therefore the output of wind and solar has been negligible to zero much of the time. So it is just not reliable. I'm not at all opposed to wind and solar when you use appropriate. If you want to use wind to pump water up into a dam, by all means. If you want solar to charge batteries that open and close gates or something, by all means. I'm not opposed to them in principle, where sadly, so many wind and solar enthusiasts seem to be in principle opposed to nuclear, no matter what. And I think there's another motive behind that. But what's important is to distinguish the power from the amount, the commodity amount. And the power is the convenience factor. So that's where the service comes in. You don't just pay for the electricity, you pay for the electricity to be available when you want it conveniently.
Yeah.
It's like buying petrol, you fellows in America refer to as gas. Imagine being able to buy gas at 20% discount, but only on 3 days a week when the owner of the station decides to open it, and you don't know that until you arrive, and it's 40 miles away. Immediately say, wait a minute, that's not convenient. You know, for the slight saving of money, you wouldn't want to do that if you're constrained to only doing it during strange times, randomly, at some distance away, and so on. So the convenience factor is terribly important. Nuclear runs 24 hours a day. You can get what they call load factors or capacity factors of over 90%, which means in the course of a year, you're going to get more than 90% of what that is rated at. So a 100 megawatt plant will give you the 100 megawatts for over 90% of the time. Whereas solar is typically 25% and wind is typically 33, about a third. Solar's quarter, wind is a third on average over the year. But you can still get 3 or 4 days where your solar is almost nothing because it's raining and cloudy, or you can get wind almost nothing because the wind is either not there or it's erratic. If wind blows too hard, by the way, the wind turbines turn themselves off. They put brakes on, otherwise they'll shake themselves to pieces. So the small modular reactors are terribly convenient and reliable.
Yeah. Wonderful. We're going to turn a little bit of a different direction here. Talk about global warming, climate change. We at the Cornwall Alliance don't buy into the fears of dangerous man-made global warming. But we do point out that climate alarmists who want to cut carbon dioxide emissions should be champions of nuclear power. Here's a brief video from the US Department of Energy that tells a little bit about how nuclear energy, especially from small nuclear reactors, already plays a big role in cutting CO2 emissions and could play a much bigger role if environmentalists would end their crusade against it.
Investment in clean energy is paying off. Cleaner energy sources are now meeting almost 40% of our nation's power needs, while avoiding over 1 billion metric tons of carbon emissions each year. The one source that produces the most clean energy, more than all other sources combined, is nuclear. Unlike other carbon-free sources, nuclear provides resilient, reliable energy, day and night, independent of weather. And a new generation of reactors will bring the benefits of clean, reliable nuclear power to more places than ever before. Small modular reactors, or SMRs, are simpler, smaller-scale manufactured versions of traditional reactors. The components can be built in US-based factories and shipped to site locations by truck, rail, or barge, making them quicker to build and far less expensive than large plant construction. SMRs are built to be durable and reliable. They are designed to shut down and cool autonomously and can be built mostly below ground, making them more resilient to extreme weather events. SMRs can operate independently from a power grid, supplying power to critical facilities such as hospitals, data centers, and military bases. With fewer siting requirements and a flexible design, SMRs can provide needed utility service in a variety of regions. For example, one unit can heat and power a remote Alaskan fishing village, avoiding the cost and difficulties of transporting diesel fuel over hazardous terrain. Multiple SMR units can also be combined to help coastal cities and island communities regain power and fresh water after a storm. The Department of Energy and its industry partners are leading the way to create and develop emerging nuclear technologies like small modular reactors. Technologies that will keep America in the forefront, meeting the world's energy demands and the planet's environmental demands.
Now, with the change of administration here in America, I think there's not quite as much excitement about nuclear as there was under the Trump administration. But there do remain some significant prospects for this. Knox, you work directly in the nuclear energy industry. What are some of the major differences between small modular reactors and traditional nuclear plants? And let's start out with size. Help our viewers to get a good grasp of the difference in size between a traditional large nuclear plant and a typical SMR.
Small modular reactors have really been defined as anything be 300 megawatts and below. Anything in that range is officially classified as a small reactor. Modular, I think Kelvin has explained in a fair amount of detail. Just to illustrate the approach or the concept of modular, if we want to apply it to the nuclear industry, is to look at the aviation industry. Aeroplanes are very sophisticated pieces of equipment, and they are built in factories and are meant to fly obviously all over the world. We have not had any problems on the African continent in terms of licensing aeroplanes made by Boeing or made in Europe. So we're saying the approach of small modular reactor is going to facilitate the licensing process, making it easier and better and quicker, as Kevin has pointed out. The main difference is one of the reasons why small modular reactors have not taken up early was because this is technology that has been used by the military, the navies. Nuclear countries have been running nuclear ships for many years, but in the navy, with the military people, economics is not the first priority. So the economics has not been built into the development of these small modular reactors. But now that it is going to the civilian, economics is now being addressed. We've had an advantage of economies of scale when it comes to large nuclear reactors. The bigger you build it, the less it is per unit of production. But unfortunately, because of the delays that have characterized some of these large plants, it has really become the advantage of economies of scale have really been eaten up by the delays in the construction of these units. And some of the delays were basically are of a legal nature, where environmentalists are challenging and saying we don't want this nuclear power plant and whatever. Sometimes it had nothing to do with technical and what have you. So those are the major differences. But before I depart on this, I just would like to point out that, as Kelvin has said, a combination of the two is absolutely essential. If you imagine the west coast of Africa with big metropoli like Lagos, Accra, you name it, all those cities along the coastal areas, if the West African countries were to cooperate and build nuclear power plants of gigawatts magnitudes in that area and distribute it to their various cities, it will go a long, long way in terms of addressing those issues. But also, as Kelvin has pointed out, that we've got big geographies. So the grid is not necessarily the only solution that we'll be looking at. We could be looking at standalone off-grid nuclear power generation. If you discover diamonds in some remote place, 300 kilometers away from the nearest power plant, you could just build a small modular reactor to power that particular unit. So the idea of distributed generation is very much applicable to small modular reactors, but big power plants are also need to be looked at, because it's not going to be easy to just power the big metropolis areas in Africa.
Uh-huh. Okay, yeah, and so I guess I'm realizing that a part of the issue about size is that a small modular reactor may be small itself, but you can link 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 or more of these together. And by the time you put all of those together, you've got the equivalent of a 1,000 megawatt plant, a larger, more conventional reactor. But the advantage is all of these modules are, basically interchangeable, and you can take them to different locations, putting them on a truck. You can't exactly put the cooling tower of a large nuclear reactor on a truck and drive it 1,000 miles. But you can do that with the SMRs. So that's I think a very significant advantage there. How about function? What's the difference in function between SMRs and conventional plants? Either one of you can address that.
Well, maybe what I can point out is that the conventional large nuclear has quite substantial fuel elements. The fuel elements are metal tubes about as thick as your finger that are bundled together in groups that are about a foot by a foot and about 6 feet long, 7 feet long. I'm trying to convert meters in my head quickly to feet. And these slide into the core of the reactor and typically last about 18 months before they're taken out. The power station manager has quite a bit of latitude as to when exactly he wants to take them out, because they take them out quite a bit of time before they're fully burnt up. The fuel in a pebble bed reactor is a graphite ball, somewhat the size of a baseball, and in it, in the case of the South African reactor, it has 9 grams of uranium. The uranium is about the size of grains of sugar. Each of them are coated with a silicon carbide layer, and they're inside like a chocolate chip cookie inside this graphite. So the graphite balls are very much easier to move around and to store than those large zirconium tubes with uranium inside them. So that is a big factor. Also, what happens is that with the small modular reactors, you put balls in, and the balls fall into essentially a big tank, and through the tank, helium gas is passed. There's 2 mechanisms you can then have. One is that you remove balls every so often and have a look at them to see what is the radiation. You can tell how much has been used up. If they've been depleted, spent, then you put them aside and put a new one in. If they're not spent yet, you can put the ball back in. So in fact, you don't have to stop the small modular reactor for refueling. You can just keep adding and then taking balls and adding and taking balls all of the time. So you don't have to switch it off for refueling. Whereas the large reactor, you've got to switch it off every 18 months, during which time you also do your maintenance and so on. And then you pull some of these large fuel elements out. This has all got to be done underwater for radiation protection, and you put new ones in. So that is a significant factor. Now, earlier I mentioned about the difference between Africa and Europe. When I was in France is very interesting because it's 75% of France's electricity is nuclear. And their price of electricity is half that of Germany, which has been pushing this wind and solar to such a degree. I spoke to French people about delivering nuclear fuel to reactors and removing the spent fuel afterwards, which is classified as high-level nuclear waste. And it is not longer than a 2-hour ride, which means that a driver can get into the truck, lock the doors, drive to his destination, and then unlock the doors. Here, that's not practical. From Cape Town, for example, the National Nuclear Waste Repository, which is about 40 years old in South Africa, it's been running a long time, one of the biggest in the world in area, is 600 kilometers away from Coburg, which there's no ways you can get there in one day in a big truck. You would have to sleep over. Certainly, you would have to stop over somewhere for lunch. It's not a 2-hour ride. In a car, traveling steadily, it's 6 hours or so to do 600 kilometers. So you cannot have the drivers locked into the cab, so to speak. So that is just within South Africa. Now, if we manufacture fuel, fabricate the fuel in Pretoria, for argument's sake, and deliver it, say, to Zambia or maybe as far as Rwanda or something by land, we have the vehicles to do that. That can be done easy enough from the point of view of the vehicle. But we'd have to say, what are the logistics? Because terrorists could attempt to steal the vehicle, or we could have somebody like Greenpeace wanting to come and take the vehicle to make a demonstration out of it in an incident, which is highly likely. So there again, the way in which the whole exercise is approached is here in Africa is different. And that's why at the beginning, Knox said, in Africa, we've got to have the self-confidence to do what we know we have to do. And that's very important. The African leaders are not stupid. They're actually pretty smart. African engineers are perfectly competent. And often what has happened is there's been a lack of self-confidence because there's an assumption that the Europeans know what they're doing. But we've so often found European solutions not working adequately here. Then you look at it and you say, wait a minute, this is Africa. It's not the same. The weather conditions are different. The distances are different. There's numbers of other reasons why we can't just do it their way. And things like these distances over which we would transport nuclear fuel and so on are a major factor. I think it's very positive. It's much easier to move the nuclear fuel over a long distance than coal, for argument's sake. Most African countries don't have natural coal or gas or oil. So the logistics of moving coal huge distances for inland countries is very, very difficult. The nuclear is much easier. And but we still have to do it our way, and we still have to think very carefully about it. So to my mind, small modular reactors is absolutely the answer. We've designed an ideal one in Pretoria. The fuel has been made already. It's a case of expanding the production. And we have a solution. We actually have reactors here that we have designed that would work very well in the United States. When I was in Minnesota, I found a lot of interest there from people in potentially putting South African small modular reactors in Minnesota and other places. The most interesting. So there's a lot of potential, I believe.
Yeah, there's a graphic that I would like perhaps one of you to walk us through if you can, called How Do SMRs Work? See if we can get that up. Yeah, there we go. This kind of compares the way that this sort of SMR, and I'm sure there are various different types, the way that it provides almost automatic, fail-safe protection against overheating, meltdown of the core. This little graphic comes from the US Department of Energy. Could one of you perhaps walk us through this a little bit in terms of the difference between how this functions and how a more conventional large reactor would function in terms of preventing a meltdown?
If Knox can address the preventing the meltdown, and then I will talk about a couple of different types of reactors. You mentioned that there's more than one, okay. So maybe Knox can explain the fact that it's not prone to melting.
No. Okay, Knox.
Well, I'm not too familiar with with any of these designs in terms of saying where the fail-safe mechanism actually comes from. But I think if Kelvin, you can address that, I would appreciate that.
Oh, all right. Okay, you're quite right, Kel, that what happens with the small modular reactors, in fact, let me first of all say all nuclear reactors. You know, we're forever hearing these days that wind and solar have undergone massive technological improvements. Of course they have. Science goes ahead all the time. The wind and solar are amazing applications of advanced physics and advanced engineering. They've improved leaps and bounds over the last couple of decades. But so has nuclear power. We're forever hearing people talk about these advances in solar and wind, but then they'll tell you about Fukushima, which is one of the oldest generation 2 nuclear reactors, and we're into
Yes.
generation 4 and 3 plus. Nuclear reactors are now nothing like the Fukushima design, even remotely. It's like looking at a Model T Ford and a modern Ferrari and saying they're both the same. They've both got 4 wheels and a steering wheel. They're not at all. So the small modular reactors have been designed that they cannot melt down. In the case of the Pebble bed one, it's got these graphite balls. The South African ones, what happened was we designed them so that if they overheat, what will happen is they just warm up, get hot, you hit the emergency shutdown button, and it'll just cool off. It'll take, say, 4 or 5 days. It's like if you turn your motor car engine off. Modern cars now, if you turn them off, there's a little pump in there that keeps the water going around the radiator for a few moments after you've turned the car off. That's exactly what happens in a nuclear reactor. When the reactor gets switched off immediately, which did happen in Fukushima, the reactor stops working. But there's a residual heat that has to be removed over the next few days just so that it cools down. You don't put your hand on a motor car engine 10 seconds after you've switched it off. You'll burn your hand. So the reactors cannot overheat. They will just warm up and then just gently cool off. Now, there's a couple of different types, as you indicated. The Pebble bed one is essentially a big tank of balls with graphite balls with uranium in them, and the gas passes between the balls. There's another type where you make the fuel move. It's a liquid. That's called the molten salt, where you put a salt which looks like ordinary table salt, but the salt has got a uranium salt in it. So the uranium atoms are actually in the salt. Then you melt it, and it melts until it's like water. Then it runs through pipes in the reactor core. So the fuel actually runs into the reactor in the form of a liquid, and the nuclear reaction takes place in that liquid, and it gets hot. Those reactors designed with a salt plug at the bottom. So if they were to overheat, this plug at the bottom melts. And if it melts, all the fuel pours out of the bottom, just like a hole in the bottom of your car radiator. It will all flood out at the bottom and spread out, which immediately means that the reaction will stop. You'll have a mess at the bottom that you'll have to clean up. The reactor will be financially damaged, quite likely, but you certainly will not have a big radiation incident or any particular harm more than any other sort of industrial accident like that. And I'd like to add, incidentally, in the case of Fukushima, not one single person was killed by nuclear radiation.
Right.
Not one single person was harmed by nuclear radiation. There have been no nuclear radiation residual effects whatsoever at Fukushima. So Fukushima was not a nuclear accident. It was an accident at a nuclear plant, like an industrial accident that could take place at an oil refinery, that you could damage the oil refinery and so on. But there wasn't a nuclear result out of Fukushima. It was a big public relations disaster, and it was highly costly for the owners. The reactor was very old. It was heading for retirement anyway, but that just ensured that it's now a financial write-off. But when you look at the massive, all the lessons learned at Fukushima, I say, wonderful. What were the lessons learned at Fukushima? You can take that huge amount of power, smack it with the biggest earthquake on record for the region. You then subsequently hit it with the biggest tsunami on record for the region, and nobody dies or gets injured from nuclear radiation. So nuclear reactors are very, very safe, and the small modular reactors are even safer than their predecessors by far.
Yeah, that is a great message for the public to get, because, as you know, green organizations have been touting the idea of risks from nuclear radiation from nuclear plants for a long, long time. Actually, nuclear energy has the best safety record of any electrical generating process. Well, I do want to just quickly remind our viewers that through the month of February, the Cornwall Alliance is offering, as our way of saying thanks when you make a donation of literally any size, the book Hot Talk, Cold Science, Global Warming's Unfinished Debate. This is a tremendously well-researched, well-documented book explaining why, although human activity does contribute some to global warming, it certainly doesn't contribute to anything that is dangerous, anything that is going to be catastrophic. And therefore, we need not abandon fossil fuels. We need not turn the world over to wind and solar and to the poverty that will necessarily come from those. If you would like to request a free copy of Hot Talk Cold Science, just go to cornwallalliance.org, fill out, press on the donate button. And as you fill out the donation form, when you come to the comments field, just put in there Hot Talk Cold Science or promo code 21-02, and we will be glad to send you a free copy of this tremendous book. Well, one promising use of SMRs would be in response to disasters, where they could be moved in and connected to a small local grid quite quickly to provide power for recovery work. Another is providing power in remote locations for small remote towns or military bases. The US Department of Energy illustrates that in a video that I think we're able to show you now.
What if we could use a small, portable nuclear reactor to provide power to disaster areas? Or rural towns far beyond the reaches of power lines? Or hospitals in remote parts of the world? Or military bases in the most remote, challenging locations? Los Alamos National Laboratory is developing the technology to do just this. The small reactor uses heat pipe technology to generate 1 megawatt of safe, reliable power. That megawatt can power approximately 1,000 houses. The entire system will fit on the back of a semi-truck in a robust container to ensure its safety and make it easy to transport to remote areas. This technology sprung from Los Alamos' work to develop a small nuclear reactor for NASA that might someday power a colony on Mars or the Moon. So we asked the question, how could we use this same technology for Earth-based purposes? To answer that question, Los Alamos partnered with the power company Westinghouse, which will use the technology to manufacture the reactors. In less than 5 years, it should be ready for deployment, helping to support humanitarian and military missions and saving lives in the process.
Just before that little break there, we were discussing the safety of small modular reactors and comparing that with large conventional reactors. And again, I will emphasize, even the large conventional ones, even back to generation 2, like Fukushima, whereas we're now in generation 4, are extremely safe. The whole worry about hazards is hyped far beyond reality. But there's an interesting, I found at the US Department of Energy, an interesting little article called "What Should I Do If a Small Modular Reactor Loses Off-Site Power?" That was actually one of the problems at Fukushima, was that they lost power supply from an off-site point because of the earthquake and tsunami there. And interestingly enough, this article, "What Should I Do If a Small Modular Reactor Loses Off-Site Power?" answers absolutely nothing. Small modular reactors, or SMRs, are setting a new standard for safety in the industry. NuScale Power is one of the companies producing these things, is moving through the US Nuclear Regulatory Commission's review process and is on pace to deliver America's first SMR in 2029. And its unique design allows the reactor to passively cool itself without any need for additional water, power, or even operator action. So this is just another issue regarding how these things maintain such great safety. Kelvin, can you add just a bit more explanation here? Why is it that the latest generation of reactors are so much safer than the older ones, which were also incredibly safe?
Well, Cal, what has happened is that, as I said, reactors have changed dramatically over the last number of decades. And the scientists have sat down, just like with anything, look at aeroplanes, how they've changed, and said, okay, what can we do? And one of the things is this passive safety. We've said, let's let the natural laws of physics be our friend. So if something is going to fall down because gravity causes it to fall down, let's design the safety features such that the falling down is to our advantage and not the opposite. So some of the modern big reactors, for example, have got large tanks of water up on top of them, so that if cooling fails by pump action, then you just open some valves at the top and it runs like a shower for some time afterwards to do cooling. So this is what's known as the passive safety. They've designed the laws of physics to benefit. Now, in the case of small modular reactors, the Pebble type of reactor, which has got graphite fuel, the graphite will not melt at the temperatures that it can rise to, like 2000 degrees or so. It's okay. Whereas the metal element ones, you always had the potential for what they call a core meltdown. That if you rise above the melting point of the metal fuel element, which did happen in the case of Fukushima, the casing of the uranium holders, the zirconium casing and so on, starts to melt, and it drips and falls down into the bottom. And then you get a mess on your hands, and what's more, that mess is a radioactive blob of uranium in there and all what they call the daughter products of the nuclear reaction, which are much more radioactive than the stuff you start with. So it's the waste that you get as a result of the reaction, which is the dangerous stuff, and that all now gets mixed into a gooey blob that ends up as a solidified chunk lying at the bottom of the reactor. And that is the danger from what everybody knows of as the dreaded core meltdown. The small modular reactors have been designed that you cannot get a core meltdown like that. In the case of the one with the graphite balls, it'll just get terribly hot, and the natural cooling, it'll just cool itself down over the next few days. We would always say the best thing you can do if there's an absolute emergency situation is everybody go down to the pub and have a beer and have a chat about what are we going to do about this later, and so on. But there's no urgent action that would be required like that. I also incidentally would like to mention that I'm one of the scientists who also does not believe that man-made climate change is this great catastrophe. Undoubtedly, since the middle of the 1800s, which people love to say since the industrial age, which also happens to be since the time of the presidency of Abraham Lincoln, since the time of the reign of Queen Victoria, since the Crimean War, and a few other things like that too that we can put dates on. But people love to say since the beginning of the industrial, which gives an inherent blame to the industrial age. Why not blame Abraham Lincoln or Queen Victoria or somebody, because they're equally good as a date marker. So yes, the carbon dioxide has gone up from 0.03% to 0.04% since the time of Queen Victoria. The temperature has risen about a degree Celsius, a bit more Fahrenheit. But the temperature has not gone up all of the time. It's gone up and gone down and gone up a bit and gone down and so on, whereas the carbon dioxide has continued to rise. I do not believe that the carbon dioxide is a problem. I think that the temperature change that we're seeing is as a result of changing magnetic activity on the sun, and that's what also happened at the time of the medieval warm period of the 1400s or so, and then the Little Ice Age, which was the time of Shakespeare and the time at which the Pilgrim Fathers started to populate what became the United States. But undoubtedly, the carbon dioxide is now a big political issue. Everybody wants to reduce carbon dioxide and have the silly term carbon neutral. It's not carbon. Carbon is the charcoal that you put in your barbecue. We call it a braai in South Africa. That's carbon. Carbon dioxide is a gas, and it's a completely different chemical to carbon. So it is a political issue, and in that sense, nuclear is an answer. Nuclear does not produce any carbon dioxide. So it is carbon neutral, if you want to use that terminology. So nuclear is excellent. And this is why France also produces far less carbon dioxide than does Germany. And yet Germany is the one that's introduced all the solar and wind, and France is 75% nuclear electricity. And they've just shown that if you have nuclear electricity, you don't produce CO2, you bring your price down of your electricity.
Right.
So there's just absolute evidence. But unfortunately, we have found the extreme greens are anti-nuclear as well. And I have a feeling that the reason why they're anti-nuclear is they do not want the electrical power to be in the hands of people who can really use it. You know, we hear the story about distributed power and so on. There's certain merits in certain types of distribution in Africa. Knox knows quite a bit about that. But this thing about everybody will have a solar panel on their roof and then somehow we'll run the country, electric trains and all that with your solar panel on your roof, it's just plain and simply pie in the sky. So nuclear is ideal from the carbon dioxide point of view because it is a political issue, even if it's not real. And we've got to bear in mind that there are people trying to stop the power being in the hands, this is electrical power being in the hands of central authorities or large authorities. I had a face-to-face confrontation a while ago with some French, German, and Swiss extreme environmentalists. And they said to my face, with a number of other African people standing listening in, they said, we cannot allow Africa to use the same amount of electricity as we used in Europe. We are a bad example. And believe it or not, they had the cheek to show a picture of an African woman carrying a bucket of water on her head from a river. And they said, keep doing that. That is living in harmony with nature. You're an example to the world. They showed another picture of an African farmer with one ox and a wooden plow plowing his land. And they said, that's what you must keep doing. Do not use a tractor. You then need diesel and oil drips and so on. And they said, stay like you are so that you don't now follow the bad example that we've set. They then also
were any of them
want
carrying
more
buckets
motor
of
cars.
water on their heads? Were any of them carrying
Well,
buckets of
exactly,
water
you
on
see.
their heads when they spoke to you?
Exactly. Yeah, but they don't want people in Africa to get more motor cars, bigger houses. They don't want to see air conditioning put in many places. They don't want to see all what electrification can do. And if they allow big centers of power to develop like nuclear reactors and that under the control of larger authorities, you can now build motor car plants. You can build all sorts of factories that require this electricity. And they just bluntly don't want it. And this is why there's this thing, have your solar panel and your little wind turbine and so on, and then quietly in invisible brackets that don't use lots of electricity, just sit quietly there and don't cause trouble. And this is the type of thinking that is behind it, not only for Africa, but for the whole world. They want to put the brakes on it. And as I said earlier, I've got every reason to believe that total world electricity consumption over the next quarter century to third century, 25 to 33 years, is going to double again. And we better jolly will start making allowance for that. Build the power sources that are going to give us the increased electricity. Imagining somehow that there's going to be a static electricity usage across the planet, this is plain and simply not true. And if you plan for that, you're planning for trouble in a big way.
Yeah, you and I have a mutual friend in Paul Dreesen, whose book Green Power, Black Death explains how the radical environmentalists really want to keep Africans desperately poor compared with the rest of the world. And it's tragic. It's worse than tragic. It's truly evil. Well, we're coming near the end of our time here. I want to just get to something else that you two wrote in your article. You said that it would be unrealistic and suicidal to try to run an entire national power system on renewable energy, mainly wind and solar. Knox, why? What's unrealistic? What's suicidal about trying to rely entirely on renewable energy to run a national power system?
This is why one of the reasons why I resent the use of the term keeping the lights on. Whenever I see somebody write and say we have to keep the lights on, I I cringe, quite frankly, because it gives the impression that electricity, electrical power is about lights. And this is why the general public gets to be seduced by the idea of solar and wind, because you just want lights, you put a couple of batteries and so on. They don't talk about production factories that run 24/7, hospitals, mines, and so on. So the term keeping the lights on is misleading. It gets the public to think, therefore, if I got a solar panel on my roof, I'm okay because I will have lights at night and I can watch television, and that's it. we should actually move away from that rhetoric and talk about keeping the mines running, keeping the smelters running, um, so that we don't talk about lights, because it gives certainly the wrong the wrong impression. So really, yeah. Did you want to interject?
And for these industrial uses, not just keeping lights on, but for the industrial uses, we need far more power, and we need it to be very, very steady all the time. And why is it that wind and solar just can't compete that way?
For starters, the sun is only there while the sun is shining, and the sun is not shining at night. And like today in South Africa, well, in this part of South Africa, we've had, like Kelvin has pointed out, we've had lots of rains and lots of clouds. There's been no significant sunshine. So you cannot run an economy. Imagine if our hospitals, our operating theaters, these days we've got respirators for the COVID. Imagine if they were running on solar and there is no sun
Hmm.
around. That means we really basically would have condemned all those people to death. We want reliable power which is available 24/7. So the idea of renewables, while we are not condemning and saying it, do away with them, they've got their uses. Like Kevin has said, if you're using solar power to pump water into a tank in a farm so that you can use it, there's sufficient storage, then that's fine. Whenever the sun is shining, you can pump your water. You don't have to be irrigating at the same time that the sun is shining. Whereas
Right.
with electrical power in the machinery, the machine runs while the electricity is being produced. It's simultaneous. But with water, you can have these two not linked in time. You pump your water into a tank, into a reservoir, and you can irrigate when any other time. These two things don't have to happen at the same time. Therefore, these renewable energy sources, there is a reason why it is like that. Sorry, there's a reason why. I always tell people that we spoke about renewable energy when I was at university, my textbooks that I used, and I was at university more than 100 years ago. And renewable energy, solar PV is not new, but people are behaving as if this is something that has just been introduced to the world. It has been around, but it has not been found to be sufficiently intensive in terms of energy. And also, it is not available all the time. It's intermittent. So those are some of the
Yeah.
realities that we need to come to terms with.
Yeah. A couple
I
minutes
think
ago,
if,
go ahead, Kelvin.
I, I was just going to take up what Knox said there, as he said the solar, and that has been known since years ago, as he said a century ago when he was at university, and very true. And so it must be emphasized that solar and wind are not new. They've been brought about politically because certain people are trying to get away from the CO2 because they believe in the global warming theory. So the global warming theory that people believe in wrongly has induced them to go for the solar and wind. It's not that the solar and wind have been shown to be an engineering solution, the right engineering solution. It's the right type of solution, they think, for the political problem. The right
Yeah.
engineering solution is to use coal where you've got it and use it in a sensible way. South Africa is mostly coal powered. We need to continue using the coal inland. Then we use nuclear on the coast and then the small modular reactors for certain centers. Now, Knox also mentioned the mines, and that's a very, very
Mhm.
valid point. You know that South Africa, of course, we've got some of the biggest mines in the world. We've got the deepest mines. I've been down to the very deepest point on the planet that is possible for a human being to go. And that is 4 kilometers down. It's a long, long way down in the bowels of the earth. On a shift, there's 4,000 or 5,000 people on a mining shift. You can't possibly risk having thousands of people underground when the electricity fails. There's cooling systems there. There's there's lighting underground. These mines are huge. There are vehicles driving around underground. They've got education centers underground. They've got shops. There's lifts going up and down. There are trains running backwards. And there's a whole little, not so much little town underneath the ground. It's not just as light as Knox says, keep the lights on. If the power fails in a mine like that, you can lose thousands of people dead. So you can't fool around with electricity, particularly when European people come along and say to Africa, you just do as we tell you and don't argue. This is not how it works.
Yeah, sort of a modern kind of imperialism that I think is quite disgusting. A few minutes ago, Kelvin, you made reference to distributed power, and that's a term that I know a lot of environmentalists really love to throw around. Oh yeah, let's get away from big grids. Let's get away from producing power in one place and transmitting it to another place. Let's produce it right where it's going to be used. This is their notion of distributed power. Would one of you just sort of pull the curtain back from the Wizard of Oz behind distributed power? Explain why this nice notion, a quaint notion, I think, just is not workable if we really want to have not just, say, a couple of light bulbs in the home, but an electric dishwasher, an electric clothes washer and dryer, and television and internet that works all the time. And what's the problem really with the whole vision of so-called distributed power?
So before
Kelvin
Kelvin
comes
in
on that, and that is it. Yes,
let's go to Knox first, and then Kelvin.
Okay.
Okay. Before Kelvin comes in, I find it ironic, or rather a contradiction in terms. The people who are advocating for distributed power are the people who are coming in with solar farms to feed into the grid to distribute using the infrastructure. I'm talking about what's happening in South Africa. They are wanting the utility company to buy electricity from them into the grid, but they are the same people who are talking about distributed power, generating the power where it is needed. If that was the case, then don't even involve solar farms. Let each person generate their own electricity. While we are at it, let each person make their own bread. Let each person take care of everything so that we don't actually go to the shops to buy bread. We make our own thing. Let's go back to pre-industrial days where you did everything for yourself. You milked your own cow and everything. You do not want anything to be centered. But the idea of distributed power is novel. It's a good idea. In the ultimate analysis, we've spoken about the use of small modular reactors in remote areas. That is a very good application where you could have a mine in a place where there is no grid yet. Maybe with the passage of time, there could be a transmission line that goes there so that we can also tap into the small modular reactor to distribute along the way, even if there's a sparse population, create the infrastructure. But otherwise, the idea of distributed generation is a novel idea, but it is being abused by people that just want to make a quick buck.
Okay. Kelvin?
Yeah, there's so many of these things that sound so good, and that's one of the snags often with a lot of these green solutions. I envisage people sitting around having a chat in somebody's lounge, and they come up with these fictitious ideas that sound grand, but in reality they don't actually work. And this distributed power is linked to a concept that's called the Internet of Things, and that is supposed to be that the whole internet is so interlinked that you can reroute electricity all of the time. So the idea being that you've got all these solar panels on everybody's roof, and if the sun is shining on the one side of the country, you take that electricity and you shift it across, and when the clouds come over, you keep with massive computing power, you keep connecting and interconnecting and whatever, and you just shift this all around all the time. That is on the assumption, as Knox said, you want to keep the lights on, that you can run your house, not that you're pulling a few thousand miners up from underground. And also, it doesn't take into account the fact, Knox is an electrical engineer, but it doesn't take into account the fact that electricity is far more complicated than at house level. For example, the frequency. In South Africa, we run on 50 hertz. In the US, you run on a frequency of 60 hertz. That frequency is critical. It keeps the clocks in computers on time, and the computers in the banks are connected to the financial transfers of the banks and so on. If that frequency goes out, even by a very, very small bit, you start causing chaos across the system. You can't just keep switching things on and off and in and out. In your house, you can turn the light on and turn the TV on and off and on, and it makes no difference basically because it's all so small. But you can't do that on the size of a city, and you certainly can't start to do that on the size of a country. You'll cause chaos. So there's a very simplistic view of what electricity supply is all about. It's not just switching power on and off and in and out, and you've got solar coming in at 12 or 24 or 48 volts, and you've got the wind suddenly going up, going down, going up, going down. You can't do that. You've got to have a much more controllable, stable system to run a country, run electric trains, and to run all the important electrical things in a modern industrial world.
Well, this has been a fascinating time for me. I've learned a lot from the two of you. Thank you very much, Kelvin Kemm and Knox Msebenzi, for joining us here. I would remind our viewers that during the month of February, as our way of saying thanks for a 100% tax-deductible donation of literally any size, we will be glad to send you a copy of the wonderful book, Hot Talk, Cold Science, Global Warming's Unfinished Debate. Just go to cornwallalliance.org, click on the donate button, fill out the donate form, and in the comments field, just put in Hot Talk or promo code 2102. We'll be glad to send this to you. Thank you again for joining us, and please come again next week for From the Stacks from the Cornwall Alliance for the Stewardship of Creation.